Welcome back, everybody, and welcome to anybody who's just joining us for the first time for this next panel, where we'll be hearing from some of our students about the symposium theme. Once we had decided the theme for this symposium, we reached out to find students who could speak to it from their own experience, and the responses that we got were a demonstration of the liveliness of debate around this subject in the student body, the variety of ways in which our students are dealing with these big questions, both as researchers themselves and also as they navigate their own path through higher education. So I am very delighted to be the one hosting this panel and all of the incredible energy that's going to be part of it. The speakers today range from undergraduate level to PhD candidates, and they will be talking about various projects that they've been a part of, all of which engage with the big theme about education for the common good, and those questions about how the university is supporting that, and also how we can aspire to do better and to do more in their various different topics. So the way that we'll run this panel, each student will speak for 10 minutes. I'll let them introduce themselves more fully than I will initially, and they'll talk about something that they've been working on. Then at the end, we'll have a combined Q&A for everybody. So if you could hold your questions until the end, I'm sure you will have loads of them. But to get started, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker for the day, Camille Boo. Camille is a PhD student in get it right, Sarah? The NIHR School for Social Care Research. And I will hand over to Camille to better explain her own project.
Thank you very much. So hi, everybody. Delighted to be here today. My name is Camille. I'm a third-year PhD student in the Department of Health Policy, funded by the NIHR School for Social Care Research. And I've been at the LSE since 2018. I joined for my master's. And since the 4 years, approximately, that I've been at the LSE, I've taken on a myriad of roles within the student union. I was a research assistant for the Care Policy and Evaluation Center, a personal assistant for the Department of Law, and I was also a graduate teaching assistant, so many different hats. And my PhD research investigates how sociodemographic factors influence the experiences of young adult carers in the United Kingdom. And this year, I've had the privilege of conducting a Changemakers project at the LSE, which aimed to understand the experiences of student carers within the LSE, from their application to the transition to the university to how they navigate their caring responsibilities alongside their studies and their student life. Their engagement with support services and their perceptions of them to provide some ways to improve them, some suggestions to improve them. So I'll start by saying student carers at the LSE are defined as students who provide unpaid care for a child under the age of 18 or an adult with a chronic illness or disability or both. And I decided to conduct this Changemakers project for two main reasons, which are interlinked. The first is because through my PhD, I've read a lot of evidence suggesting that young adult carers are impacting their life outcomes compared to young people who do not provide unpaid care. So they have poor mental and physical health outcomes. They have lowered outcomes in education, and this perpetuates into their employment and training, where they are more likely to be unemployed and have lower earnings from employment. The second is because access to higher education and inclusion within higher education are two topics that are very important to me. I don't think I need to convince anybody in this room about the importance of accessing quality education on your life outcomes. Over the course of my PhD, I met a lot of young adult care advocates, professionals who support these individuals, and I've worked a bit with national and local charities supporting carers, and accessing higher education was often at the top of their priority lists to ensure that they could achieve positive transitions into adulthood. To make higher education, to make the higher education environment more welcoming, a particular charity called Caring Together created Care-Friendly Take Awards, which are given to educational institutions if they meet a selection of criteria. And so when I'm asked about what the future of higher education should look like, I'd start by saying that higher education should stop associating the the professional and personal spheres of individuals' lives. Rather, when admitting new students, hiring new faculty and staff, they should holistically welcome them and strive to create an environment that isn't just focused on meeting targets or achieving top grades. In my Changing Makers interviews, this was often a critique from participants, that when student carers were struggling and sought out help, they often felt misunderstood or that just nobody cared beyond their academic achievement. I understand that as attendees of a higher education institution, that is ultimately why we're here to get this degree, but it makes it for a very isolating and lonely journey to only be seen as a data point and a measure of academic reputation. The future of higher education should also continually seek to improve its accessibility and inclusivity. In my Changemakers project, I found that student carers often made decisions about joining the LSE, taking into consideration their caring responsibilities and the well-being of their care recipient. So housing and finances were important decisions. For example, some students decided to remain abroad because their child needed healthcare in their home country, and that was more easily accessible in their home country. Others chose a place to stay that was within commuting distance of their care recipient or within commuting distance of a nursery that they trusted for the care of their child with. Student carers often worried about finances because they wondered how they would support their families and afford childcare while living in London. And caring while studying, just in general, adds a lot of anxiety and stress. Time is a particularly limited resource for student carers, and they often need extensions for their assignment and exams, but were met with burdensome administrative processes that were not always understanding that things that happen to their care recipient can also affect them. I think higher education institutions are in a privileged space and that they can create policies and support systems that dismantle these barriers. Student carers often felt underrepresented within the LSE and faced imposter syndrome and yearned for peer support groups that they could relate to. And so ensuring that university is more accessible to all sorts of individuals could promote feelings of community and belongingness. The Changemakers Research Program is a great initiative, and I really think that all higher education institutions should implement something similar. It was a real privilege to research on an issue that I cared about and provide recommendations based on evidence. My only fear is that with such programs, that the important findings and suggestions of students are kind of get lost in the bureaucracy and the politicalness of it all. And so while students commit to conducting this research, it's also important that the higher education institutions also commit to implement the suggestions to the best of their ability. I think this is particularly important because I interviewed 10 student carers, and they shared very personal details of their lives to me, and it just feels, sorry. They share very personal details of their lives to me, and in the hope that it will create change. And I mean, if you put yourself in the situation where you're opening yourself up in that hope, but then nothing happens, you can imagine how exhausting and frustrating that must be. So I will leave you all with a quote that I found during my PhD explorations. It's by Rosalind Carter, a former First Lady of the United States in the late 70s, that says this, and I think it sums up perfectly what I've shared with you today. There are 4 types of people in the world: those who have been carers, those who are currently carers, those who will be carers, and those who will need carers. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Camille. That was a wonderful place to start the panel. I'm now going to move on to our second speaker, Dylan Stevens. Dylan is an intern with the Eden Centre, a graduate intern, who's been working on student partnerships. And so we're going to hand over to Dylan to talk about how those empower students and what his work in the Eden Centre involves. Are you happy to step up here?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. As Sarah said, I am a graduate intern on student partnerships in the Eden Centre. I have only started here about a month ago, so I can't tell you too much about what I have done so far, but more about what is to come. But I also completed my undergraduate degree at LSE in 2021 in the government and the philosophy department. And so I can speak a little bit about my experience as a student, particularly a very recent student who's now working here. So I don't know who all of you are, and I don't know about your familiarity with partnerships, so I feel like I should speak a little bit about what they are first, based on what my colleague Lydia, who runs partnerships at the Eden Centre, has informed me about, and also some of my broader research. So student partnerships are essentially programs that may be curricular or co-curricular, where students work in partnership with academic staff or other university staff. And so it's a kind of, I guess, a change of role of what we, I guess, now traditionally think of as the student as a sort of passive consumer of knowledge or of education into having a more active and deep learning role. So in this case, the student is not only involved in, for example, research or the creation of a course or the creation of assessments, but in doing so, they're actually thinking about what it means to be a student, what learning is, what education is more deeply. And so a lot of this work on partnership sort of began around the early 2010s, particularly in 2014 when the National Union of Students posted a manifesto for partnership. And a lot of that work has mostly looked at partnership in pedagogic programs. But at LSE, we have some different forms of partnership that are outside of the classroom. One is the Changemakers project that Camille and Sia have worked on, and the other is the Student Education Panel, the last meeting of the year we'll be having next Monday. And that's a group of students across the school who provide sort of consultation on various educational issues at the university. So when I was a student, I was completely unfamiliar with the idea of partnership in any sort of formal definition. And to be honest, I think that is the case for most students still. Though that doesn't mean that students aren't actually engaging in partnership in the classroom, outside of it, in more informal ways. I was surprised to know actually that a professor of mine whose work I enjoyed and I felt a sort of, I guess, the closest thing to a partnership with was awarded an award for partnership in teaching. But I didn't think of this in the classroom environment as an example of partnership. And I think in some of the meetings and discussions I've been having with colleagues, it's difficult to know where to draw the line between what seems like good quality teaching and teaching where the student is actually being taken seriously as a partner. There are many increasing opportunities for student voice at LSE. We have the SU, obviously, and SSLCs and things like that. But often, I think student experiences, and particularly the experiences of students who are underrepresented or marginalized, they tend to be, frankly, fetishized a little bit in higher education and taken as something to be consulted, but not necessarily acted upon in strong ways. Camille has just mentioned about the findings of her work in Changemakers and wanting to have that being taken on board by the university, and that was actually feedback I received from all the Changemakers participants I spoke to yesterday. There's this important aspect, I think, of trust that is taking place in partnership. You know, students are, in case of Changemakers, doing research, giving up time outside of their already very, very busy degrees to help the university. It's thus actually quite important that the university and staff take those findings very seriously and really do reflect upon their own roles in relation to their students. For example, actually, even on a PhD level, there was a changemaker yesterday who spoke about being sort of experiences of PhD students and mentioned that one of the professors sort of chose not to engage with PhD students because they were students, as if students was somehow a negative thing. I think this sort of attitude is, it really holds back both students and staff, really. I guess to speak again on this idea of student experience and sort of being taken seriously, I think for a lot of staff, and this is something that's quite common across student partnership research, there is this fear of, I guess, around shifting power dynamics, this idea of students sort of taking on roles of staff or being considered as peers. And I think that those are perhaps maybe slightly overstated fears that don't actually necessarily happen in practice in partnership. Students actually have very clear ideas about the roles of staff, and in fact, they want staff to have staff-like roles. They, as students, also want to have student-like roles. It's actually, if anything, more about codifying that relationship in a clearer way and looking at what each role brings to the discussion, rather than a sort of, I guess, the more consumer-based model of education that seems to be in place now, where students, I think my colleague Claire has often called it sage on a stage, when the student is just sitting and the professor is preaching their grand wisdom to everyone. I think that there are ways of changing that in and outside of the classroom that are beneficial to both sides. The other thing I guess I would say about partnership is that there are concerns, particularly again around students who are underrepresented in various parts of the university, that sort of increasing responsibilities or roles may act as a kind of burden upon them or increasing time. I think that generally research has shown that students tend to be more engaged in their learning as partnership. They don't tend to see it as a burden so much as really actually an opportunity to be more engaged in their work and less alienated from it. But this is a very relevant aspect about partnership that part of my work at the Eden Center is here to explore, which I guess I can talk a little bit about now. So following the sort of research and wider sector evaluation that I basically am working on now, I'll be conducting some mapping and evaluation exercises of partnership at LSE, not just partnership as we sort of know it with the change makers and the SCP programs, but also ideally looking at where partnership might be happening in places where we don't actually sort of always know, in classroom settings, in more informal sort of research internships between faculty and students. Following there, a lot of the sort of primary research that I'll be doing will be looking at student experiences of partnership, student views of partnership, and how partnership is communicated and understood by students. If time permits as well, thinking about where to expand partnership at the university, I think particularly in classroom settings. And I guess to link it a little bit back to the general theme about educating for the common good, I was very interested by what James had mentioned at the keynote about sort of growth and expansion of the courses with an aim to reach 10,000, I think he said, plus students. I agree that growth is often a good thing, especially getting more people to access higher education. Obviously, that's been like a running theme throughout today. But I think the key is not slipping back into that sort of consumer-based model of education and actually maintaining still a level of engagement and sort of deeper learning, even with students who might be studying using open technologies through distance, who might be carers or part-time students. I think it would be a mistake if growth meant a codification of that model, and it's something that I think universities really should be resisting. I understand that I guess there are broader social forces at work with governments and economies and things like that, but universities are in both, I guess, a sort of a difficult position that are subject to sort of resource use and misuse and various forms of monitoring. They also are places where a lot of change can be done, and particularly for students, giving them sort of like tools and ways of thinking about themselves and about their learning that they can apply not just to their learning but outside of it as well. I think this is really important in breaking down ideas of higher education as sort of elite hierarchical institutions and ones that are more based on dialogue, on reflection, and a sense of egalitarianism between staff, students, and the wider communities they are in. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dylan, for that insight into the work that's ongoing and the aims that puts forward. Our third speaker is Alicia Bruce, who's an undergraduate in the Department of Government. Aleesha also has a YouTube channel about gaining scholarships and supporting people in education. So if we could drop that into the chat and on Twitter right now. Brilliant, David. And I will pass over to Alicia to tell you more about her experiences and projects.
Thank you all for having me. So I'm a first year undergraduate and I'm currently pursuing a BSc in politics and economics here at the LSE. So I'm the baby of the panel, so please go easy on me in the Q&A. I'm also an UGLA family scholar and I'm a part-time program director and mentor in education with a brilliant charity called DebateMate. And I also secured work experience with BCG, PwC, IEA, ASI, Now Pensions, Civica, and the Inclusion Initiative in my first year. And the one that I'm going to be delving into is the Inclusion Initiative. So just before I go on to that project, I want to talk about the importance of the scholarship to me. So I'm not sure if anyone has heard about the UGLA Family Scholarship Programme, but it's quite a unique scholarship. And when I told my headmaster at my old school that I got it, he was shocked at how large it is, because it's the largest financial scholarship at the LSE. But what's quite special about the scholarship is that it's not only financial aid, but what comes with that is also mentoring, career coaching, networking, and the donor is actually very involved with us as scholars. So that has meant a lot to me. And through this scholarship, I feel like I've come into LSE and felt not intimidated, but part of a community. So through that, I networked and cultivated a connection with Dr. Grace Lorden. And this is a great connection because she's a very accomplished individual and she's very inspiring. And I'd sort of phrase her as very much a girl boss. So it was quite inspiring to me. And this is what led to me having an internship with the Inclusion Initiative. So I offered to volunteer with the Inclusion Initiative just because I had researched their mission and fell in love with what they were doing here at the LSE. And by January, I was offered a research internship with them, and the project that we looked at was thinking of behavioural biases in regard to transitioning back to work post-COVID. And these biases could be either pre-existing biases relevant to that transition, or it was actually an opportunity to be really creative and think of new biases. And as a team, we compiled the most important biases that can impact the future of work if left unchecked. And specifically, I reconceptualized 2 pre-existing biases, and I also created 2 of my own, which was quite cool to do as a first-year undergraduate. I won't go into this too much. I'll leave this for the Q&A in case anyone wants to ask me what those 2 biases were. But my favorite bias that I created is called the deferred meeting bias. And I noticed that my macroeconomics lecturer is actually in the Zoom, so I probably shouldn't say that this was my favorite one. But it's the tendency to actually avoid attending live virtual meetings because you persuade yourself that you will view the meeting recording later. But yeah, but because of a plan and fallacy, sometimes that doesn't materialize, essentially. But yeah, if you'd like any further detail on those, I'm happy to talk about that later. But this project was particularly amazing for 2 reasons. And the first thing that I took away from that was the fact that I was the only undergraduate on a team of postgrads and professors. And I really found that to be a valuable opportunity. Initially, I was really intimidated because I thought, what can I bring to the table as a first year? I know nothing. But when I realized that I was actually a valued member of that team, I started to understand the benefits of that. It definitely expanded my horizons and perspectives. And it also made me pull up my socks a little bit because just because I'm the youngest of the team doesn't mean I can just, chill. I'm still assessed on the same standards. So the master's students also taught me things and inspired me, even just like meeting up after a project to get pizza or something to bond as a team was very valuable. And I think it was great because the project did exactly what you said. It brought together research and different minds to help build more inclusive work environments. And I'm here today because I think that LSE should push for more interaction and internships in other departments between masters and undergraduate students. Just like how I am on this panel today, I've already picked up so much from our master's students here and PhD students as well, just in how they articulate themselves. That's very inspiring for me. And I think that LSE should take advantage of that high postgrad population that we have here. And definitely one thing that's already trickled down from postgrads is that work ethic and that drive to push for internship offers that you probably hear about when you hear of LSE. But I just believe that there's so much more that we as undergraduates can learn from postgrads. The second thing that I took away from this project that was really important was the relevance of my project to the wider world. So as a first year, the fact that I had the ability to influence the way that corporations think about how they provide inclusive work environments was pretty amazing. And that's because the target audience of our project was corporations. So, when it was shared on LinkedIn, professionals and leaders in their field were actually commenting on the project and saying that it stretched their thinking on the subject and it was a great read and that they hadn't thought about certain things before. And for me to just receive that sort of positive feedback from accomplished individuals has made me more ambitious to strive for opportunities. So, so it shows that the voice of a young person matters at the end of the day, and that's what I love about LSE. So just going on to my YouTube a little bit, which Sarah really kindly introduced to you guys, but it's projects like this that have actually given me the confidence to launch my own venture. So I've always wanted to help students, particularly from disadvantaged backgrounds, in accessing top-tier opportunities. Because I mentioned that I am an Ugly Family Scholar here, I also gained 2 scholarships prior to that, 1 to sixth form and 1 to grammar school, but I only ever found them accidentally, by accidentally stumbling upon a website of a private school or a grammar school. And I wish that I had someone that looked like me to tell me and guide me through the application process. It would have massively helped and I would have felt a bit more relaxed going into that. So my YouTube channel discusses accessing scholarships, opportunities, amazing universities like the LSE, internships and more. And to do this, I give an honest account, I'm very transparent there, of my struggles and my journey from state school to private sixth form to LSE. So if you have any, younger siblings, friends, cousins, anything like that, then I'd massively appreciate if you could spread the word, because I'm trying to help out as many young people as possible. But thank you.
Thank you so much, Aleesha, for that, and for a sort of set of examples that I think follows on quite well from what Dylan was saying about the importance of partnerships. And on the topic which Aleesha also brought up about the future of work, I would like to call on our next speaker, Sia Shah, who is a master's student in the Department of Psychology and Behavioural Science, and is also returned to education with some questions from industry. So I'm going to hand over to Sia now.
I've got a fetish for timing myself to make sure I'm staying within the 10 minutes. So that's what I will be doing. I have worked on a Changemakers project, but that's not what I want to talk about today. I actually want to talk about something that I have been thinking about for a while, and about something that when you think about, you've got a room of a captive audience of people in education that I think might be relevant for you. And what I want to talk about is the question of what is the value of higher education in an age of workplace automation. And of course, my answer to the question is going to depend on my background and on my experiences. And so my background is that I'm a current master's student. I will be doing a PhD in psychology. I have worked in consulting, and I'm currently a software engineer at a startup. And my work as a master's student and my PhD work actually focuses on automation in the field of psychotherapeutics. And when I was in consulting, we were working on client projects where we were trying to figure out what are the skill sets that the future workforce would require in order to stay relevant. And now, in order to answer that question, what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about automation generally, and then I want to circle back to what I think is my personal answer to what the value of higher education is. And so the first thing is, when you talk about automation as a phenomenon, it is it's a place where there's a lot of exaggeration. I think automation is over-promising and under-delivering. And what I mean by that is, if you historically look at different pushes in automating different things, and automation is really tough to get that done. For example, in the 1950s, John McCarthy, who was a winner of the Turing Award, which is a Nobel Prize in computer science, in 2 months with 10 others, he thought he could create machines that would essentially, quote unquote, take over the tasks currently reserved for humans. And what he meant by that phrase, we are nowhere close to that today. Then there's the question of, historically, what has the impact of automation been? And you've probably read a lot of articles about how automation will, take care of our jobs and there won't be any jobs. But I want to highlight a particular piece of research done by Deloitte very recently. I think it's in 2021, and they looked at the case study of Switzerland. So in Switzerland, between 1999 and 2010, 100,000 jobs were directly lost because of automation. 230,000 jobs were directly added because of automation. So net, there was a gain of 130,000 jobs. Now the thing that changed was the composition of those jobs. There were fewer people in agriculture, fewer people in manual labor, fewer people in low-level motor tasks, more people in the services. Now, of course, you might say, look, the past is not a predictor of the future. And so what is right is that we don't know what will happen in the next couple of years. We've got some sensible scenarios coming out of research by Deloitte and McKinsey, and there is a time frame component. There is a long-term answer, and I won't necessarily discuss it unless you ask me about that. But in terms of the midterm, in the next 30 or 50 years, I think the most plausible scenario is that the net effect of automation is neutral. Some jobs will disappear, some will change, but new ones will be added. Now, let me highlight one other thing. So people are worried about automation. I think the worry should be, what if we don't automate? And that's why I want to have this discussion with you guys. It's actually a fear that the House of Commons is having right now. They published a report 2 years ago urging the UK to automate more. Why is that? When you're looking, for example, at the amount of robots we had per 1 million hours of work, it's 10 robots in 2015. When you look at Japan, they had 170 roughly. And why is that a problem? It's a problem because it partially feeds into something that in the UK we call the productivity puzzle. So when you look at productivity in the UK, up until the financial crisis of 2008, it was steadily increasing. And then it stagnated. And it's still stagnant today. And it means that today, workers in the UK produce no more than people 10 years ago. And that's a problem because employers will go overseas where people are just more productive. According to the ONS's own estimates, the US, for example, is about 30% on average more productive than the UK is. Now, slowly coming to the juicy bits and answering the question. Of course, research on automation has looked at what are the skills that people require in order to be relevant. And there is some uncertainty in the estimates, and I will raise 4 areas, and I'm circling back to them a little bit later. Area number 1, higher level cognitive skills. What are higher level cognitive skills and what are lower level cognitive skills? Data entry, lower level cognitive skills, not required in the next couple of years. We are automating all of that. Higher level cognitive skills are, I will show up to you and tell you about my employment tribunal case. Let's assume you're a solicitor. You figure out how I'm going to win it. That's a higher level cognitive skill. It requires synthesis, analysis, advice, judgment. Different area. Advanced IT skills. Now, I don't think as a software engineer, everyone needs to learn how to program. I don't think that's useful. But there are different things people can learn. Like these days, university students work on video projects. They can learn how to use After Effects, which is industry standard, as opposed to Microsoft PowerPoint. Interpersonal skills. How are you going to coax your team members to adhere to that deadline? A massive problem in industry, even when we looked at around the work we were doing, is sometimes these simple things like following deadlines. Connected to that, project management. Now, are graduates generally in a good position in terms of automation? I think the partial answer is yes. The answer comes from when we look at data. And so when you look at which jobs are at massive risk of being automated, only 10% of jobs of graduates are at massive risk of being automated. That compares to 50% of the jobs done by the least educated men and 30% of the jobs done by the least educated women. And if you're a postgraduate, as some people are, you may have an advantage. When the ONS tried to estimate the amount of people in high-skilled labor, and high-skilled labor protects against automation, 80% of postgraduates are in those positions compared to 65% of undergraduates. So that's the good news, I think, in terms of automation. The bad news, a little bit, I think, is that automation makes things more unequal. It contributes to income inequality and performance inequality. There's an hourglass effect to it. And if you look at the middle class in the US, for example, and that's McKinsey data, in the US, 60% of people used to be in the middle class. Now it's only 50%. And of those 10% that moved out of the middle class, a third of them are now in the lower middle class, or they are in the lowest income households. So things are getting tougher for graduates. I know I'm still supposed to speak, so I'm not done yet. So if I now slowly circle back to what I think is the answer to what is the value of higher education in an age of automation. Of course, higher education's value is the academics you do, the connections you make, the internships you do, absolutely. But in a world where there's more transition, where there's more change, what is it that stands out for me? And what I think is the value of higher education is that term, that buzzword, meta skills. Now the problem, and why I wanted to discuss meta skills with you, here's a quick definition. Meta skills are those skills that allow you to modify other skills. They're useful across domains. I'll give you an example in a second. The reason why I wanted to have this conversation with you is because when you look at the work that's being done right now on meta skills, and when you're looking at what people are currently thinking about higher education, just I think 6 months ago, a KPMG report came out about how universities are now at their crossroads, and in some ways they're right. And of course, universities are thinking about what are the skills we want to impart. I think it has to be meta skills, but right now we have not done the work. We don't have a proper definition of it yet. We don't know how we should teach them. We don't know how we should measure them. We can't agree what those meta skills are, and therefore more work is needed. But I'll give you one example of a meta skill I think is incredibly useful. So most people at university have to learn, and you probably have to continue learning a lot. Just recently, a CFO that we know got fired because he couldn't learn the skills fast enough, and he was replaced with somebody who was willing to learn. And it was VBA, Excel stuff, very basic stuff. So the skill to learn itself is a very efficient meta skill. There's actually an incredible amount of research on what makes efficient learning. It's like hidden in the psychological literature. There's things that you will find out called retrieval practice, interleaved practice, and they make you learn things faster. If you speak to most students, they don't know about these things. So I want to leave you a little bit with this to think about. Are meta skills important? If yes, what can we do about them? Probably it's not a one person, not a one university job. It's multiple people, concerted effort. It's a little bit like an APA task force where they try to figure out how to go about this. So I want to leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sia. We'll move on to our final speaker. Sarah Garona is a graduate intern as well at the Eden Centre. She's working in the area of inclusive education. And I'm just going to hand you over to you to explain that to us. No, Sarah.
So much. Thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone for your talks. I'm hoping to bring it back, I guess, to what I think is actually at the core of educating for the common good and is very much at the heart of what we do in the inclusive education team, which is to look at student identity and its role in feeling like you belong, feeling legitimate in the higher education space. So, much like Dylan, I'm only new to the job, only here for a month, so I can't really give you much expertise, but I suppose I can speak to you about the project that I've taken on that had been started by the previous graduate intern, and say, I guess, what we hope to get out of it and what I think are really the core principles that hopefully we can integrate and work to educate for the common good. So yeah, I'm the Inclusive Education Graduate Intern here, working on a project at the moment on exploring student identity in higher education, so how that relates to their experience here, what it means to be successful here, what it means to be an LSE student. Obviously that applies to all institutions, and actually a reason why I wanted to join the project here is because of my own experience. I had I suppose the luck of working at two separate institutions prior to my time as a master's student at the LSE. I was at Exeter and had personally a very different experience of what it meant to be a student there. Coming from London, it was obviously a far smaller, in some ways far less diverse environment, which personally I really struggled with, and coming here was almost a breath of fresh air. And when I read what this project was about, in making sure that the university space is actually representative, I suppose, of all the students here, I really resonated with that, and it's very much at the heart of the project that we're doing. So just to run you through, I guess, what the project is itself, it's very much exploratory. I haven't had the pleasure of doing the qualitative research, but it started with interviews, has also taken the form of diary entries and finished with interviews as well, to see how the student journey across undergraduates, postgraduates at all level of their studies changes, how it changes with time, how it changes across terms, and what kind of themes are actually coming up, what students consider important, what they consider it means to be an LSE student, whether they feel like they belong in the space based on that as well. And obviously, I don't have pre-packaged findings for you, unfortunately, but I'm sure the report will be shared when the work is done. In terms of what we're finding so far, though, it's very much about connection. It's very much about building support networks. It's very much about feeling included and legitimate within the space, feeling like you're represented, not only within the student body, because I think everyone can probably agree it's much more than quotas, hitting numbers, things like that. It's also about actually feeling represented in the work that you're studying, in the voices that are being shared, in what you're being taught, in the conversations that you're having in classrooms as well, and making sure that kind of inclusion is really embedded at all levels. So yeah, we've spoken to students from a variety of backgrounds, a variety of levels, like I said, and even though it's obviously hard to generalise findings like this when it is in a lot of depth, what we're looking for is that nuance. What we're looking for is insights from students which hopefully break the mould, hopefully find ways of restructuring what it means to be a student at the LSE, which again is at the heart of the Inclusive Education Action Plan and the projects that we're doing here. It's about trying to dismantle structures which aren't representative of our student body now, and making sure that it's really responsive to the needs, the demands, and the lived experiences as well of the students here. So I think, relating that back to educating for the common good, it's making sure that we are truly educating for the common good, and not what we think might or is the common good, what might have been the common good, but really making sure that it stays in touch with the student body. And so in terms of recommendations that I have so far, it's to listen to the students to make sure that they actually have an active role in the material that's being taught, in the way that that material is being taught as well. So I know a lot of conversation has been had on online versus in person, for example. But considering also perspective of various perspectives, not just online is better, but in person, pardon me, is better, but online might have benefits for students who struggle to get in or struggle to have the full university experience in person as well. So I suppose what I hope to leave you with before lunch is very much the idea that keeping students' identities, their experiences, the variety of their experiences at the heart of education, and making sure that it really is at the front and centre of the work that we do. Well, not so much me, but I suppose the work that educators do in teaching students and making sure that they are truly equipped to make the most of the opportunities that higher education offers. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you to all of our panelists for being brave and coming along and speaking today. We're going to have a Q&A section. I think the way we'll do this is if anybody in the Zoom call has questions, if you could raise your hand if you want to speak, or put it in the chat if you would like Marina to read the question out for you. And if anybody in the room has a question, please raise your hand and we'll start in. Does anybody want to go first?
I'll go.
Yeah, Stella, thank you.
Hi, yeah, thanks everyone. I thought that all 5 talks were absolutely amazing. I'm Stella Ekibusi, I'm Head of Digital Education Futures. My question's for Sia. So obviously we speak a lot about kind of like enhancing the use of digital in education, and seeing where the LSE, in my work, I mean, where the LSE can go in terms of exploiting digital technologies like that. When you speak about automation in that sphere, the future can often feel a little dystopian when you're thinking about AI, about automation, about who's taking decisions, how data is being used. And I think a lot of that is valid based on what we've seen in the past. I appreciate what you've said about the past isn't necessarily a predictor for what will happen. But in terms of the ways that AI and machine learning have been used to basically entrench and perpetuate kind of existing inequalities, how do you square that within the education sphere, that kind of debate around that?
How do you square?
Or how do you respond to that feeling of a dystopia?
How do I respond to? So I have to partially infer what I think the question is, just because I'm terrible at hearing, so maybe a little bit far away. There's a variety of perspectives on the progress of it. Let me give you an example from work. So in therapy, about 10% of people deteriorate. They don't get better, they get worse. And therapists are not good at spotting who these people are. And AI algorithms can spot them. And so that helps the patient. And so in many ways, you know, it's always a mixed thing. Right? In many ways, technology makes somebody's lives better. You know, how do I square? You know, here's a funny thing. In the long run, we are all dead. So it's that famous Keynes thing. So if you really take automation to the end, they'll always do everything you can do, even the stuff they tell you about creativity and the like. The computer will be able to do that better than you can. So really, the way, if the question is how do you deal with inequality eventually being the product of massive automation, I think that's more of a political question, because whoever has the power to make certain decisions about how the state is run, universal basic income and the like, they need to make those decisions. I am a little bit left of center, so I do think a solution is required. I'm not sure I know what the solution is, because when you do give people universal basic income, some people don't like it. They want to have that sense of purpose and accomplishment, so you have to encourage it. So if I understood your question about 50% right, that would be my response.
Thanks.
Did you follow up, Stella, or is that?
Yeah. I think your first example was actually a really, really good one. It wasn't so much about inequalities, it was about kind of people's resistance, I suppose, to embracing automation for reasons of what has happened in the past. But I think that was quite a nice example about examples where AI can actually spot things that a human can't, who is entrenched in those. And I think there is an assumption that humans make, there is often an assumption that humans make better decisions, but I think the data can help us prove that that's not necessarily the case.
It's a great point. I mean, I'm sorry, I'll just follow up on that because I'm chitty-chatty, but you know, behavioural science and as Grace Lorden will tell you, it's all about how we make decisions really poorly, really regularly. And that's a little bit of a generalization. I mean, as a heuristic, we are adapted to make some decisions really well. It's just that in modernity, our algorithms are a little bit outdated. And so, back to your point, there is a real hesitancy. There's a literature on technological hesitancy. Algorithmic aversion, that's actually the literature, what it's called. Where, for example, in a health setting, you can get patients to use an algorithm, for example, to spot a melanoma, and you can see that the algorithm does better than a doctor, and still some people will not choose the algorithm. It's a slightly different question. It's a question of how do you encourage adoption if you know that something is truly superior without any repercussions. And there's people doing some work around that. But what I can tell you, just in terms of aversion, every time I see aversion in the workplace, the people who are averse to it, they just get fired. Because it's all about speed. You've got to get, well, to be fair, in my environment, because it's so much about speed to get things done quickly. There are deadlines, there are demanding clients, and so technology makes you faster.
It's a really fascinating perspective on that, actually, where we can push. I had another question. I think this was for your first.
In a question, comment.
Yes.
I was thinking that a lot of the questions raised are related to inequality and also to the fact that there is not much of social mobility, neither in the UK, the last at least 30-40 years, neither in other European countries. Thinking of Piketty's and other sociologists' work, I've kind of relied to. And maybe, I don't know, it's not just different profiles of students who might need extra help to get out, but maybe LSE or the university reaching out to them and also accompanying them after they leave, because they might leave with a fine degree but then fall into the lack of knowing how to navigate the working space. And
So is the question there about sort of the support of people when we sort of expand education?
So would the LSE or the University of the Future need also to reach out, like invite those who might come from different backgrounds, support those who are already inside, and then accompany them and not just leave them to take care of themselves?
I wonder, yeah, if Camille or Aleesha or Sarah wanted to speak to what the follow-on you would like. Aleesha, you had...
Yeah, I'll have a start comment. I think that what your point is about social mobility is why I really value scholarships. But the reason why I brought up the fact that my scholarship has like quite a unique design and the fact that it's not just a financial aid is because I feel like LSE could actually capitalise on the non-financial elements, because obviously not everyone can receive a financial scholarship, that's unrealistic. But all the other things have actually meant more to me than the money in the immediate term anyway, because I'm not realising the long-term impacts of that. And stuff like personalised career coaching, stuff like having networking opportunities, all that kind of stuff would be extremely valuable. And I feel like it would make you feel not lost, because when you come to such a massive university like this, it's very easy to feel lost and out of place as well in terms of social mobility. And your point as well about LSE sort of interacting with students before they come here is actually a great idea, because I'm not sure how exactly it would work, but my sixth form, what they did to promote their scholarships was they actually visited schools in the area from high poverty areas and promoted the scholarship and ways that they could get into the private school. So I think that that's something that LSE could definitely engage with.
Camille and then Dylan.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, so at the LSE we have the Widening Participation Division, which I think does a lot of work in, you know, talking about the experience of the LSE and making sure that it's accessible as possible to all sorts of individuals. And they actually helped me get the data about student cares at the LSE. So they're definitely pioneers, I guess, in that aspect. But yeah, I guess that's kind of what it did for me. Yeah.
So, Dylan, did you want to follow on?
Yeah, I did. I guess, sort of thinking what Alicia was saying about like these broader things, and also I guess a little about the conversation before. I personally don't share the enthusiasm for speed in learning. I know that's an increasing global necessity, but I actually think you'll have more people being left by the wayside. We already have this, as I mentioned, a very consumptive-based model of learning. Yet we actually see that students are even less integrated into learning environments. LSE notoriously performs very poorly in student satisfaction ratings. We're doing work in education enhancement at the Even Center to look into learning communities as to whether they actually exist, you know, meaningfully at LSE. And so I think really before we turn to questions of speed and increasing like the growth, and we need to look at the depth of how students are learning. And I think that I guess a lot of the ethos behind partnership kind of internships, Aleesha was talking about, and widening participation as well, is actually drawing on the experience that students have come to university with, not expecting them to gain more from it immediately, that they're actually offering something to it. That's not only a good way of integrating the student into higher education learning from like an undergraduate level, but also like actually treating them as a sort of more active person. That gives them the kind of skills that hopefully would be beneficial, not just in social mobility, but also, I think, narrowing the big gaps in attainment. A lot of students who come from very privileged backgrounds, who might have parents who were very highly educated or gone to very high-performing schools, might come into an HE institution and know exactly what they're getting out of it. Others, like myself included, had no idea what we were stepping into. And the ability to speak on that experience before being sort of like having information thrown at me, I think is actually a great way of narrowing that gap.
And actually, if I may add, just from data from my qualitative interviews that I conducted, it seemed like it's very department dependent on how personal circumstances are taken into account in your application and in your acceptance at the LSE. So some departments are better at taking that into account than others. And it tends to be usually like policy-ish departments that are better at taking that into account, probably because personal experience is so important in that area. And I think, you know, there was a lot of talk as well about academic mentors, especially for undergraduates, being a key individual to help them navigate, but them not always being aware to ask for more than just, how are you doing at school, you know? So I think, yeah, there definitely needs to be a bit of awareness as well at that level.
I'm aware of some more questions in the room. Marina, do we have any questions on Zoom that I need to queue up? Great. I think Akila, I saw you.
Thank you, and thank you to all. Really insightful, but also so different to my own experience at the university and the idea of the common good. So when I went to university, it was to get a better life, to get out of poverty, you know, immigrant parents. And it just seems that narrative has shifted slightly because of the current government and austerity. And something, Camille, you alluded to, the idea of being a carer, for example. Once you're a carer at a very young age, you continue to be a carer until, you know, to the end of your life, effectively, for many of us. And then looking at what Alicia was saying around, you know, all the work that you're doing and the internships and the opportunities, this idea of time and how how important it is and having time to do all these things. And something that Sarah and I, as part of the project, have found that students that we would deem non-traditional, their experience of time in the space of education are very, very different, and having the time to do all those things. It's not just about anymore coming to university and getting a degree and then finding that job. It's all those other things that you have to do, the internships, the work experience. And how do you do that if you have a part-time job, you're looking after children, you're looking after parents, siblings? And I just wonder, has that common good almost shifted in this time? I just kind of wonder what your thoughts are, because you're all sort of living that experience. It's very different for me from where I'm standing here, because education gave me the opportunities and took me out of poverty, and I don't see the same thing for my own children. So I just kind of think what your thoughts are around that.
I mean, I can start off by saying that the main theory that I'm using in my thesis is an economic model of household production, which basically, in it, basically, it says education improves your technical efficiency, which is that you become better essentially at using your resources to produce goods, including things like informal care in this sense being thought about a good. So I guess it would, access to education, if you think about this theory, would increase, would make you save time maybe in a way. And if you were able to access perhaps better employment opportunities, also allow you maybe to purchase services such as provision of informal care. But then there's the other question of, do you actually want to outsource that informal care to somebody else? So yeah, I'm gonna start with that, and I'll ask the panel what they think.
Yeah, I was literally writing down something to say. Now, I was going to comment on that as well, because I feel like me and you probably have a similar background, because for me, I feel like, and I don't know if this is like the same case for other people from my background, but I feel like sometimes I strive to do so many different things because of where I come from, because it's almost like a struggle or a fight to get out of that environment and to not be anything like the role models that raised me, essentially. But I think in terms of time, I feel like scholarships actually save a lot of time, because having that sort of financial backing there and that security there means that I don't have to work. I have chosen to work, so I've chosen to be a part-time mentor, and yeah, that's why I feel like they should be promoted more widely so that people know about them and that they don't just find them accidentally.
I think we can probably take one more question if there's anybody who has anything they wanted to ask. So, in that case, we can continue the conversation over lunch, and please feel free to come and pick our students' brains at that point. I want to say a final thank you to our panelists who have been so amazing today. Thank you so much for coming and speaking to us.